Good morning and welcome to my presentation titled Adapting the Mix, How Hearing Differences Reshape Professional Audio Practice. I am Lorenzo Bonoldi, a second-year PhD researcher at the University of Salford Acoustic Research Center, and I'm working on the influence of hearing differences on music mixing practices under the supervision of Professor Trevor Cox and Dr. Adam Hart. Professional music production has traditionally been built on the assumption of a stable, unimpaired listener, both on the side of listening audiences and audio engineers. Mixing pedagogy, studio standards, and evaluative tools typically presume access to full bandwidth hearing, particularly in the high frequency and transient domains that underpin clarity, brightness, and spatial detail. However, the reality of professional practice diverges from this ideal. Audio engineers are routinely exposed to high sound pressure levels over long careers, making hearing change due to aging, noise exposure, tinnitus, or hyperacusis highly prevalent. Despite this, hearing different engineers remain largely invisible in both academic research and industry discourse, often due to stigma and the fear of professional delegitimization. This study aims to reframe hearing difference not as an exception or deficit, but as a common condition within professional audio practice, drawing on the concept of oral diversity, which positions hearing variation as a spectrum of perceptual experiences rather than a binary distinction between normal and impaired hearing. By centering the embodied listening experiences of professional engineers, the research challenges the assumption that there is a single perceptually correct way to hear or mix music. This reframing is crucial because it opens space to examine how engineers adapt their workflows, decision-making, and aesthetic priorities in response to perceptual change. Rather than treating deviation from normative benchmarks as a technical failure, the study proposes that such differences may encode expert adaptive strategies developed over years of practice. This perspective provides the conceptual grounding to establishing why inclusive, perception-aware approaches to music mixing are both necessary and overdue in contemporary audio engineering. Normative mixing standards play a central role in contemporary music production. Industry benchmarks such as loudness targets, spectral balance norms, and reference tracks are widely used to define what constitutes a good or professional mix. While these standards offer consistency and communicability, they also embed implicit assumptions about listening ability. Most are derived from population averages or idealized listener models, such as equal loudness contours and ITU loudness recommendations, which do not account for individual variation due to hearing loss, tinnitus, or auditory fatigue. Such standards can marginalize engineers and listeners whose perception diverges from the assumed norm. Many hearing different engineers experience tension between what feels perceptually comfortable and what is professionally accepted. Interview data reveal that engineers often suppress their own embodied listening preferences in favor of general conventions, client demands, or visually driven workflows. As a result, perceptually comfortable decisions such as reduced high-frequency emphasis or moderated dynamics are frequently overridden even when they would support long-term listening health. The limitations of normative standards is therefore not only technically but epistemologically incorrect. They frame deviation as error rather than adaptation. By highlighting these constraints, the study argues for a rethinking of mix evaluation that recognizes perceptual diversity as a legitimate factor in professional decision-making. This critique sets up the need for alternative analytical frameworks that integrate measurement with perception without enforcing a single reference point as universally valid. The study adopts a participatory mixed methods research design that deliberately foregrounds the expertise of hearing different audio engineers by positioning them as co-investigators whose perceptual knowledge is central to the generation of insight. Methodologically, this approach combines qualitative and quantitative elements, including coded semi-structured interviews, reflexive research narratives, collaborative remix sessions, audiometric assessments, and systematic audio feature analysis. Ethical approval was obtained prior to data collection, and participant engagement was structured to ensure accessibility and reflective depth. A key methodological innovation is the invitation for participants to create two parallel mixes of the same material, one optimized for their own perceptual comfort and hearing profile, and one aligned with professional or genre-based norms. This dual output design allows for direct comparison between personalized and reference-oriented practices, making perceptual adaptation analytically visible. Qualitative interviews before and after the remix sessions capture how engineers articulate their hearing experiences, coping strategies, and professional tensions. These narratives are thematically analyzed to identify recurring patterns across cases. By integrating practice-based production with reflective inquiry, the methodology avoids reducing music mixing to abstract measurement alone. Instead, it acknowledges the hybrid technical creative nature of audio engineering and provides a rich, ecologically valid account of how perception, identity, and professional norms intersect in real-world practice. Participants in the study were professional audio engineers with a range of hearing differences, including age-related hearing loss, tinnitus, hyperacusis, and frequency-specific sensitivities. Audiometric testing was conducted to document peripheral hearing profiles, but crucially, these data were treated as contextual descriptors rather than predictors of mixing ability. This distinction reflects a well-established limitation of pure-tone audiograms, which capture audibility thresholds but fail to account for supra-thresholds processes central to music perception, such as timbre discrimination, dynamic sensitivity, and auditory scene analysis. The study includes participants with symmetrical and asymmetrical losses, shallow notches, and irregular configurations, demonstrating that similar audiograms can correspond to very different perceptual experiences. By analyzing audiometric diversity alongside qualitative accounts and mixed outcomes, the research highlights how frequency configuration and interaural symmetry often matter more than overall degree of loss. Participants describe adaptive strategies such as mixing at lower level, simplifying arrangements, relying on visual metering, and taking frequent breaks to manage fatigue. Importantly, none of the participants framed their hearing differences as a loss of professional competence. Instead, they described them as conditions requiring adaptation. These factors underscore the importance of moving beyond deficit-based interpretations of hearing data and recognizing audiometric diversity as one dimension of professional expertise. To support systematic yet inclusive analysis, the study introduces a structured mix analysis report template built around a descriptor metric mapping framework. The MATLAB Audio Toolbox software was used to extract features such as loudness, spectral balance, dynamics, stereo width, and transient behavior. However, these metrics were not treated as evaluative judgments or optimization targets. Instead, they function as descriptive reference points useful to interpret each participant's perceptual identity. Common mixing descriptors such as clarity, warmth, punch, width, and comfort were explicitly linked to indicative signal level measures, creating a shared analytical language between technical measurement and lived experience. This framework balances rigor with accessibility, allowing participants with varying technical preferences and hearing profiles to engage meaningfully in reflection. Crucially, the approach avoids enforcing normative benchmarks as standards of quality. For example, lower spectral sensitivity values are not framed as deficiencies but as tonal tendencies that might reflect fatigue avoidance or tinnitus management. By positioning perception as epistemically primary and technology supportive, the framework challenges the notion of objective mixed quality. This analytical design operationalizes the study inclusive philosophy, demonstrating that measurement and subjectivity need not to be in opposition when carefully integrated. Across participants, hearing-optimized mixes exhibited measurable divergences from normative professional benchmarks. These mixes tended toward reduced high-frequency emphasis, smoother transient behavior, moderated dynamic contrast, simplified arrangements, and more conservative stereospatialization. Importantly, these characteristics were not random or indicative of technical limitation. Instead, they reflected deliberate strategies in response to perceptual discomfort, auditory fatigue, and hearing change. For example, participants with tinnitus frequently reduced energy in the 3 to 6 kHz region to avoid triggering ringing or irritation, while those with asymmetric hearing favor narrower, center-focused stereo images to maintain spatial stability. Dynamic moderation was often described in embodied terms, such as avoiding mixes that feel pressurized or mentally tiring over time. The study demonstrates that these perceptual choices leave identifiable traces in objective metrics, linking listening physiology directly to production outcomes. This finding challenges the assumption that deviation from reference norms necessarily signals error. Instead, it suggests that personalized mixes encode a form of situated expertise optimized for sustained, comfortable listening rather than short-term impressiveness. A central qualitative finding of the study is the persistent tension engineers experience between embodied listening preferences and professional expectations. Interview data reveal that many participants routinely make perceptually comfortable decisions during the mixing process, only to later reverse or override them to align with general conventions, client demands, or assumed audience expectations. This dynamic illustrates how normative ideals exert pressure on professional practice, often at the expense of the engineer's own auditory preference. Participants describe this tension as both cognitive and emotional, involving concerns about credibility, translation, and market acceptance. Some engineers report relying on visual analysis tools as a way to compensate for perceptual uncertainty, while others describe suppressing discomfort as an expected part of professional discipline. By making this tension explicit, the study exposes how professional norms can marginalize hearing different practitioners even when they remain highly competent. These aspects highlight the cultural dimension of mixing practice, showing that adaptation is not only technical but also negotiated within expectations embedded in the industry. Cross-case analysis reveals both shared patterns and individual variation in how hearing differences shape mixing outcomes. While all participants demonstrated some degree of divergence from normative benchmarks, the specific strategies employed differed according to audiometric configuration, general context, and professional identity. Some engineers prioritize comfort through reduced loudness and spectral darkness, others through density and stability, and others through spatial redistribution rather than spectral change. This diversity underscores the study's central claim that there is no single compensatory response to hearing difference. Instead, perceptual adaptation is highly situated, emerging from interaction between hearing profile, experience, tools, and genre-specific aesthetic priorities. The comparative synthesis also shows that improvements in clarity and intelligibility often result from redistribution rather than addition. For example, reducing low-mid congestion rather than boosting high frequencies. These insights suggest that inclusive mixing practices might benefit all engineers, not only those with hearing differences, but encouraging more reflective, perceptually grounded decision making. An important analytical outcome of the study is the demonstration that objective audiometrics can support inclusive practice when framed descriptively rather than prescriptively. Measures such as LUFS, spectral centroid crest factor, and stereo spread proved valuable in making perceptual tendencies visible and comparable across cases. However, when interpreted without normative targets, these metrics function as tools for reflection rather than judgment. This reframing challenges the common industry tendency to treat metrics as indicators of quality or correctness. Instead, the study positions them as conversational scaffolds that bridge subjective experience and technical description. These findings have significant implications for education and tool design, suggesting that analytics can empower rather than constrain engineers when decoupled from deficit-based evaluation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you found this presentation interesting.